everyone. My name is Tara Egan, and I'm one of the practice partners leaders here with G8 Education, and I'm based in Sydney. Tonight, on behalf of G8 Education, I'd like to warmly welcome you to our family webinar. Please be advised that this session is being recorded, and we will share details on where you can rewatch in the coming days. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which I'm joining the call today, which is the land of the Gadigal people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and I'd like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been nurturing and teaching children on these lands for thousands of years. Families, one of our values at G8 Education is safety first and always. As part of our commitment to child-safe organisations and delivering on the national curriculum, we're really pleased to be collaborating with Act for Kids in the implementation of the Emmy and Friends program. We will have some Q&A time or question and answer time at the end of this session, so you are welcome to post any questions on the Q&A function that you can see on your screen. We're likely to have some time restraints this evening, so we will return to more family questions in the next webinar. Also, if you've got any topics that you'd like to see in the later family webinars, you can post those on the Q&A section as well. What you post there tonight will shape the further webinars that will happen later with families this year. So just to confirm, we will be using the Q&A function and not the chat function tonight. Now, I am so pleased to be introducing Nathan Gallagher to you. He is the Child Protection Training and Development Lead with Act for Kids, and he's going to talk us through the Emmy and Friends program and how you can support your children at home as we work together to keep children safe. Over to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Tara. Hey everyone, it's lovely to be online talking all things Emmy and Friends. It's going to be, excuse me, really fantastic to be able to connect as much as possible and connect to some of the curiosities and questions you've got about the Emmy and Friends program. And it's also going to be really nice to hear some stories of it coming alive as it's embedded across centres. As Tara said, I'm the Learning Development Lead for Child Protection at Act for Kids, and have been really enjoying being on the journey with all of the Emmy coaches at G8 as Emmy starts to come alive. I'll just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, so Yugara and Turrbal land for me, and south of Brisbane, Magingen. I'll pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'll also just note that deep respect extends to unceded custodianship of land across the country. And especially in the context of keeping children safe, happy and thriving, I just want to note, take a moment, take a breath to acknowledge the knowledge and wisdom that comes from, it's unique to really unceded custodianship. All right, so thanks for joining for a webinar at 7:30 on a Tuesday. I know that for some households it'll be quite a busy time, for others it'll be just taking a breather after the busy times earlier. So it's great to be online with everyone. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to introduce you to Act for Kids. If you haven't heard about Act for Kids before, I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and why we exist. We're going to talk about the Learn to Be Safe program. Do you know what exactly is it? I'll give you an introduction to that. We're going to have a look at some of the resources and the website with all of the free resources that are available for you. And we're going to have a brief look at the map of topics for each of the webinars that we're going to be together for. And that also links to your questions as well. So we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. Any of the questions that you put in the Q&A, excuse me, they'll be compiled. We will make sure that we're answering all of those questions for you as we go. Plenty of things will kind of, plenty of pieces of the puzzle, if you like, will come together over the webinars, but we want to make sure that anything that you're curious about, we'll answer that as accurately as we possibly can. So we'll talk about some answers at the end of tonight, and then we'll also revisit a list of questions from the Q&A in webinar 2. So Act for Kids, you can see our purpose there really, really clearly. So we help keep kids safe, heal from trauma, and lead happy lives. There's a few statistics there for what we did, particularly in the last 12 months or so. So 530,000 reports made to child protection authorities, a little over 42,000 cases of confirmed child maltreatment in Australia. More than 30% of those were children and young people from First Nations communities. And I just want to stress the point that we do a lot of considered work in thinking about the overrepresentation of Indigenous children and families in the child protection system as it currently exists. And that overrepresentation's the biggest focus in terms of systemic responses and systemic abuse for children and young people in Australia. So you can see there 36,771 people, more than 21,000 kids, Act for Kids helped in pursuit of that purpose. So let's go through some of the elements of the Emmy and Friends program. So Learn to Be Safe with Emmy and Friends. You can see Emmy and her friends there. She's not friends with the clouds, but they are in the image. So, Learn to Be Safe, it's an internationally recognised, evidence-informed protective education program. It's been around since 2008, and one of the unique things which we'll talk about as we go, we'll have a little bit of a closer look at it soon. It's one of the only, or the only, protective behaviours program in Australia that's been independently evaluated. So peer-reviewed research across a couple of universities have assessed its impact. So that's a really good marker for us to see how it's going and see how we can continually fold in and make it the best we can. But it's also a good indicator for for children and families. We're all here because we want kids to get kids to maintain being healthy and safe. So that's really good that independent research could be done and talk to that. There's a heap of resources to be used that are rolling out across centres, and you'll be able to use them at home. And one of the really kind of forward themes, if you like, of questions around Learn to Be Safe is, how do we connect to the rhythm of doing this at home? How can we do this together? What language do we use? What strategies we use? And that is exactly what the webinars are here for. We're going to work through a lot of those as we go. We're going to work through each of the safety topics. And following this webinar, we'll unpack this, but following this webinar, there's a Family Threads guide that just gives you a little bit of information about each of the safety topics and some of the strategies and tools you can start to use at home. And we can build on that throughout the rest of the webinars. So Learn to Be Safe is focused on activities for children from about toddlers to about 10 years old. It can be adapted for adolescents, but it's definitely a focus in the early years. And there's a wide range of practical resources for parents, carers, educators, professionals to be able to use. And the vast majority of those are free and accessible on the website. So it'd be good to talk through some of those. And probably one key kind of note around Learn to Be Safe is that the whole program is designed for sustainable learning to normalise talking about safety. That does not mean that children and young people are not already talking about safety. They are really commonly, and that's something that families and households play an obviously vastly key role in. So there's three elements there. So Learn to Be Safe is a protective education program. It empowers children. So we often talk about making sure that children aren't to blame and they're guarded from shame around people who are hurting them or people who are creating conditions that put them at the risk of being hurt. So it's a program that empowers and doesn't hold children responsible. So filling their toolbox with a whole heap of things for recognizing unsafe situations and giving them the power and the agency to have fun conversations around safety and normalize them for their everyday so they can build on those skills as naturally as possible. It empowers educators to embed thorough child-safe practices. So for those who are not familiar, a few years ago, the Royal Commission into Responses to Sexual Abuse led to a national set of child-safe standards in Australia that all of the states and territories have now adopted in different forms, mostly supported with legislation, and most states and territories now have a regulator in place to monitor compliance. So it's a very, very, very big change across practice and education community, so human services and education, an enormous change, and Learn to Be Safe connects in to make sure that those child-safe practices can be normalised and embedded in the everyday. From classroom to early years centre, right through to at home as well. And making safety learning fun and sustainable. So not just focused on content, but how do we make it so children can really embrace these conversations and normalise safety learning with everyone in their life. So you can see there, been supporting educators since 2008, so it's been going for quite some time now, and there's about 64,000 children, and that grows every single year, that have gone through the program either directly or through something like what is being embedded at G8, which is the Emie Coach network. So just a quick note on the research. There's quite a few protective education programs and courses. Emie is underpinned by more than a decade of research evaluation, folding that in across practical delivery for schools and early years services all over the country. So there were two key studies done, and you can read about that research on the website, that were peer-reviewed independent studies done by universities that actually took a breath and looked at Emie, how it was done, and assessed it. And there are a few key findings. The other key thing is, as well as child safe standards, it's also recognised by the Australian Institute of Family Studies and completely aligns and connects in with the early years and primary curriculums, as well as the national quality standards for early education. So just a quick touch on some of the findings of the research, and all of the studies are there to read, are the two independent peer-reviewed studies. So at the time of writing, it was the only evidence-based program in Australia to undergo independent university research, and these are the things that they found. So they found that number one, it improved children's knowledge of safety and protective behaviours. So tick, that is a really good thing. Found that children were more likely to choose safe responses in unsafe scenarios compared to not doing the program. So that's a really important thing. It found that children demonstrated increased confidence in disclosures and help seeking. So that's a really important thing. Being able to, and we'll unpack this as we go through the program and across these webinars, but empowering children to tell and tell again is a really powerful thing. If they've got that feeling in their gut, something's unsafe, something's not right, they can tell a safe adult anything, is a really key message throughout the program. And the other thing is, the studies found that they retained the knowledge up to 6 months after program delivery. So it was a good indicator of sustainability. So that gives you a really quick snapshot of the research, the independent research at the Emie program, and those studies are there for those inclined to go have a good read and a good absorb with those. So the program itself is based on the Act for Kids Protective Education Framework, which is a really simple, not simple, straightforward um, organisation of protective behaviours education, and Learn to Be Safe works through that framework. There's a whole set of structured learning, guided learning, and teachable moments, and all of them are an age and developmentally appropriate, language type of activities. And yes, they do evolve as kids get older. And there's also a few things that we like to connect to in terms of rhythms. If children are really, really young and they're not going to connect fully to all of the strategies or the sentences, that's completely okay. There's a few things that we can do in that space which we'll work through. So there's 7 core learning areas across the program, which we'll have a good look at the outline of. In early years, we call them safety threads. So basically, safety threads are the core topics, the focus topics that are worked through throughout the entire program. And there's 8 embedded protective strategies. So you can think of embedded protective strategies as actions or ways to not so much the exact content of what's happening, but how we teach. So 8 core skills, actions, protective strategies that educators can weave into learning. So all of these elements come together and create a system that is aimed explicitly to empower children and families and communities to proactively normalise safety learning in their lives, which is a really powerful thing. So this is something that we all want together for our children and young people, right? We want them to be safe, we want them to be happy, and we want them to be thriving. And the whole program is based on that core wish or hope that we have for children in our lives. There's 2 core beliefs, probably foundational principles, if you like. So the first one, key message for children, is we all have the right to feel safe and be safe all the time. We all have the right to feel safe and be safe all the time. And so there's a couple of things there. It's a we, so that's everyone. That's educators, families, children. All of us have that right. And the second thing is being safe and feeling safe are 2 really core things. And we'll work through that a little bit across the webinars. And the second one is what I was talking about before. We can tell a safe adult anything, no matter what. Tell, and tell again. So we're going to unpack what a tell is in terms of some of the things that we can grab from the language or the ways that kids communicate if something's unsafe for them. But you'll also notice there that it doesn't just say if we're unsafe. It says we can tell a safe adult anything, no matter what. So it normalizes those, deep relationships that all of our kids have with safe adults in their lives, and tries to build on that as much as possible. So I mentioned before, there's 2 core things. So safety threads in the early years program, and they're the learning areas. They're the core topics. The other thing are what we call learning beads. And so they're all of the education tools, all of the strategies, activities that educators use across the program. So each of the safety threads has a set of learning beads. And the reason they're learning beads is because they're all connected to each other, which we're going to have a look at in a sec. So they all build on and make learning sustainable. So they all build like steps onto each other. So let's have a look at the safety threads for the Emmy program. So there's 7 core areas there. First one is what is safety? So connecting children and young people to that core idea. The second one is building on the notion of feeling safe. So being safe and feeling safe. And then we flow on to warning signs. So what are some of the things that our body might tell us, some of the things that might pop up for us if we're feeling like something's unsafe or something's just not quite right? Then we shift on to body consent and private parts. Now, both of these are a very common space where we have lots of conversations around making sure that, thinking about using consistent language, thinking about all the strategies that we can all use to normalize talking about these things. They're also the two areas that have the most questions pop up about them. And so that is exactly what the webinars are for, is to work through those and make sure that we're getting these really thorough strategies in those two to make sure that children are safe, but not just making sure they're thorough, making sure they're accessible. So they're conversations or bits of language, they're teachable moments that can be used by everyone and normalized in conversations with children and young people. Then we move to talking about unsafe secrets. So we talk about some of the things that, some of the secrets that are good and don't hurt us, and some of the secrets that aren't so good. And we unpack telling the difference between those two things. And then the final one is putting our safety team together, which is a really fun activity using our hands to put our safe adults together. And it's not a hidden network, it's not a secret team. We educators help children to put their safety team together and have curious conversations around safe adults, but then also let them know together that they're on our safety team. And children, always find that it's an incredibly fun, but also in a really empowering way to finish the learning. And then all of those safety threads fold onto each other, and it can be embedded in sustained learning and teachable moments, some of the language that is used across centres. So all of those come together to make sure that in an age and developmentally appropriate way, children are safe, but most importantly, that child-safe practices that normalise and make fun safety learning are embedded across the everyday of centres. So in each of those safety threads are what we call learning beads, which are just the specific tools and strategies that are used to build on the learning and make the learning fun, sustainable for children. So you can see there, and we're going to unpack these in each of the webinars, but each safety thread starts with reading a book. So all of the centres have got the books that are used. They're really fun, really rhythmic books to first read as a group to connect to. And then we connect the key message for each of the safety threads. And then there's some thinking questions. There's a core question, which is called a provocation, but there's also a number of other questions that get kids thinking about and reflecting on some of their learning. And then that shifts into transition activities. So for each of the safety threads, there is a song that's available on YouTube, and apologies, some of them will get in your head and they'll be quite considerably stuck. So apologies about that. But that's also a good thing, because the songs are great fun. They're a great transition activity. And then there's a number of guided play activities that are used in centres, and there's really explicit guides for each of those for educators. And then there's a number of teachable moments, which are not so much the structured activities, but they're the things that we can catch. Some of the moments that might come from a question from children, or might come from a situation or something that we can reflect on. And so we catch all those teachable moments as much as possible. And then there's some extended learning for educators, which includes, resources, different activities. A lot of activities around safety learning are already in centres and used by centres. So the Emmy program is a way to organise all of those and really amplify embedding them in every day. So there are safety threads and learning beads. There's a whole set of learning beads for each of the threads that take place as the program starts to unfold in centres. And then you remember I was talking about protective strategies. So there's 8 core actions that are taught throughout the coaching sessions. And they are designed to, so yes, we've got the content, we've got the safety threads, we've got the learning beats, but they're designed to be really encased in relational action. So for educators and families, we're going to go through in the webinars the protective strategies themselves. So it's not just what is being taught, but how. So some of the rhythms we can connect to make sure that child safe standards are completely amplified and normalised in the day-to-day of every centre. So we're going to go through the detail of these, but I did want to introduce them to you. So the first one is called One Step Removed Problem Solving. So we're going to go through those, but instead of talking about a problem that we are personally facing, we talk about Emmy and her friends. And so we shift the focus from, instead of having a direct conversation with children around solving a problem to make them safe, which is something that can amplify feelings of guilt or blame or shame, we use one step removed problem solving to have a really fun conversation with them where they get to empower Emmy or one of Emmy's friends or someone else, like an educator, for example, to solve a problem. So it's one step removed from the child. A trauma-informed language of safety is embedded throughout the program. We're going to go through a little bit of detail of this. However, one key thing that I did want to say to you at the moment is that what we know about connecting to a rhythm of being mindful of trauma is one of the most common questions we get is, yes, but my child hasn't experienced developmental trauma, so this isn't for them. What we know about being trauma mindful is that sometimes for kids who do have developmental trauma in their story, some of the more traditional behavioural communication methods that are used in education can create some challenges for them developmentally. But what we know about being trauma mindful is that all of the aspects of those, in terms of the strategies, the language devices that we use, some of the things we use to connect to the relationship that we have with children, they are really great developmentally for everyone. So whilst it is not a solely developmental trauma focused or an attachment focused program, there are a number of trauma mindful elements that are embedded throughout the program, which we're going to unpack. Removing blame, guilt and shame. We know that one of the most common experiences for children who have experienced being harmed or being put at risk of harm is that internal feelings of blame, guilt and shame are one of the main drivers for not telling again a safe adult in their lives. And so we actually purposely use multiple strategies of removing blame, guilt and shame, so children do feel empowered to tell again if they need. Disrupting unwritten rules is one of the protective strategies we use. And essentially, disrupting unwritten rules are having a purposeful look at some of those unspoken rules in our communities that make it more likely that someone can put children at risk of harm or harm children and keep it hidden, which is one of the things that they want to do. So we unpack in a really fun way, disrupting some of those unwritten rules for children. Assertiveness. Assertiveness does not mean aggression. And assertiveness also does not mean being rude or, having a sense of disrespect in relationships. However, we know that one of the other things that we know when children do communicate with a safe adult around something that's made them feel unsafe or they've been harmed in the past, we do know that sometimes adults miss mostly the first time that they tell. There's a couple of reasons for that, and none of it has anything to do with the fault of the adult. And we unpack the notion of being assertive if you feel unsafe or if you're in an unsafe situation, having a sense of assertiveness and being empowered to do that so a safe adult connects with the message that we're giving them. The same thing with persistence. So tell, and tell again is a very purposeful rhythm of 3 times, and we unpack that as a protective strategy rhythm throughout the program. Help seeking, and the pointy end of the activity for safety team, the safety team thread, is the notion that we unlock all of the ways that children can seek help from a safe adult if they are in an unsafe or risky situation or they're worried about something, because we know that sometimes when children are in a situation where they're unsafe, there are a number of challenges or blocks to help seeking, and sometimes none of them are at the fault of anyone. All we want to do is fill the toolbox of children in an empowering and fun way to be able to seek help when they really need it from a safe adult. And the final one is protective interruption. And again, we're going to go through the detail of protective interruption, but essentially that whole strategy is about making sure that in a group setting, if a child discloses something that is really serious that's happened, or maybe not so serious, and the message isn't so clear, we want to make sure that we draw a bridge to unpacking that with them as soon as possible, just without having another 15 children all in the conversation. So we want to make sure that we are unpacking that in a really structured way with them and as soon as possible. We don't want to miss it because we're busy in a group setting. So we're going to unpack that further. So I know this is a lot of information in webinar 1, but I wanted to introduce you to the 8 protective strategies that are embedded throughout the program and throughout the learning. Excuse me. First off in the coaching for educators, and then transitioned into skills that children can learn, connect to, and then build with throughout their life. All right. So many of you will have connected to some of the resources. Hopefully, for everyone in centres, the book has come home. So that'll be a first introductory and kind of fun setting to read that with your kids. The Emmy coaches themselves, so the practice partners for G8 that took part in the Emmy coaching training, which is the Train the Trainer program, they have a learning guide and a facilitator guide which steps through each of the safety threads and all of the activities and all of the things that are part of the program. There's a heap of activity guides, and there's also a heap of posters and different resources that can be used as part of activities. So blank sheets with different prompt questions. There's a wealth of activities and resources associated with those activities. Following this webinar, you will all receive the Family Threads Guide, which is basically providing a little bit more information about each of those safety threads, so each of those core topics, and then some of the strategies, tools, language, things you can try, things you can use at home to connect to the things that educators are beginning to roll out and embed in the day-to-day of centres. So it enables you to connect to some of the language and strategies they're using because we know that working together is the most beautiful, the most impactful, and the most wonderful way to make sure that kids are safe and connected. And we know that repetition of that rhythm for some of those strategies and some of that language also helps them to connect to the learning and hold it as they build developmentally. And then, of course, there's a heap of videos. There's coaching videos for all of the Emmy coaches on each of the safety threads. There's a couple of facilitator and session videos that you can see on the website. And all of the songs and animations are all on the YouTube channel, but they're all accessible through the website as well. So feel free to get the karaoke set out and start singing to some of those songs as we unpack the safety threads. So just a quick note on the website itself. So there's a whole resource hub on the website. So emmyandfriends.com.au. You can search for different types of resources, different types of activities, depending on those core areas, those core topics. And then there's also, whilst we're not talking about primary school here, there's grade guides for lesson plans and those kinds of things that can be taken through into primary school and connected to with teachers. And then, of course, the songs are there for you to connect to as well. All right. So feel free to have a really good look through the website itself. And sift through some of those resources if you haven't already. And there's a heap of resources that will roll out across each centre as they unpack the safety threads. So that is a lot of information, but it's a really great thing to be able to connect you to the Learn to Be Safe program and introduce you to some of the core elements of it, how it works and what's involved. So these webinars are for us to connect to you and what you need. So we've got another 4 webinars this year where we can start to do deeper dives. So we'll do some deeper learning across each of the safety threads. We will start to unpack more tools for use at home. And for those who are really keen, talk about some more extended resources in each of the safety threads as well. You can go away and have a little bit more of a look. One of the spaces that I do want to encourage in the webinar is whilst we've got a lot of us online and we can't have a normalized conversation and reflect on some of these things, we can and give some answers to some of the more common questions that pop up, especially around, we know that as children connect to the Emmy program, or indeed any protective behaviours program, there'll be some things that pop up at home, some of the things they say, some of the things that they ask, and some of them, might throw you a curveball. Some of them you might be unsure how to answer. Some of them you might be completely ready for an answer, and then some of them might I don't want to say the word worry, but you might definitely be curious about either the timing or how they're understanding the learning, because everyone's different, and that includes educators and all of the centres. And so the most important thing is that we all do this together as much as possible. And there's a number of ways that children developmentally connect to safety learning, which will throw us a curveball question, or my body, my choice when it comes to bath time, all those fun things. And the first thing is that's completely okay, right? The second thing is the Emmy program is specifically designed to be able to connect that learning to unsafe circumstances. Excuse me. And so we explicitly talk about, things like private parts, things like body consent, things like touch. There are elements of all of those that keep us healthy, keep us safe, and they're part of our relationships with safe adults. And bath time is one of those really common examples. So we're going to do a deeper dive on those, and give you some language strategies, give you some things to try, and I want to stress, and I'm going to talk about this in a sec, but you know your little ones best, right? So you won't always need us to give you a strategy. You'll have that covered, but we can reflect on that as you need. If you need some tools or strategies, or you're just curious about how to deal with a certain question, we'll hopefully do that together across all of the webinars. So we're going to do a deeper dive, excuse me, next webinar on spheres of safety or conditions of safety. And basically that is the underlying notion of if we create all of these environmental spheres of safety for children, then we give them the best chance to be safe, happy, and thriving throughout their life. And that doesn't just include risk of harm from unsafe adults. That also includes how they connect to their future relationships, how they see themselves in the future, in creating those spheres of safety, which already exist in beautiful, rich, deep ways in the tapestry of, families and relationships and communities and early years centres that are already there. We build on those and do a deeper dive. We're also going to do a deeper dive on the feeling safe safety thread. So connecting the notion of being safe with the notion of feeling safe as well, and making sure that those two sit together for children as they build on their learning. We're going to do a deeper dive on the body consent safety thread, go through some of the content, some of the language, some of the things that they're going to connect their community, or the timing of how you as families are teaching them those things. They're going to connect them to the Emmy program. We can work through those together. Same thing with the deeper dive on private parts and thinking about private parts and touch. And then in our final webinar, we're going to talk about the secrets, unsafe secrets, and the safety team safety threads together. And so as all of this unfolds, we'll have a heap of tools, strategies, resources, but most importantly, be able to answer questions and make sure that it's accessible for you, because working together with centres and keeping, obviously, as we all do, keeping our children's safety at the centre is a really powerful thing, and is something that we all desire. And just, a really quick note, meaningful safety learning takes time. It's not perfect. It unfolds in all sorts of different ways. Children, young people, and us as educators and adults, families, parents, communities, we all connect to this in different ways. We'll have different conversations. There'll be different focus areas depending on where you are. And meaningful safety learning takes time, but that's the most important thing, is if it does take time and the learning builds and is normalized and is sustainable, then children take that throughout the map that they have for the rest of their lives, and the way that they communicate, the way that they keep themselves safe and others safe, and the way that they connect to their relationships. As I said before, you know your little ones best. So we can give you some tools, strategies, we'll give you some language. We can reflect on some of the things to think about as children connect to this and process all of this learning. And all those curveballs, we can hopefully have a little bit of fun and reflect and build on that together. And the final thing is, working together is definitely the secret sauce. So we want to make sure that you don't need to remember verbatim everything that's happening in the Emmy and Friends program. It's certainly not something that you need to view as a stressful skill set to build. Make sure that you have all of the language exactly right. That is absolutely not the intent whatsoever. But we also know that if there's consistent routines across home and early years centres, we know that we have the most success keeping children safe, happy and thriving. All right. How do we do? 8:15, that's not too bad. So we're going to jump into some quick questions and answers. I haven't had a chance to look at the Q&A, but we'll have a look at all of those. The GA team will compile those, and we can answer some of those. Hopefully the Family Threads guide that's sent out will answer a lot of questions for you. But any others that we haven't yet touched on, we can open the next webinar with them and answer as many questions as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nathan. That was such a great overview of the program and so informative. We do have time for one quick question, if that's okay with you. We've had a question about how does the Emmy and Friends program work with children of different ages, thinking about does the program grow and change as the children grow?
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I touched on that a couple of times. It is a very purposefully age and developmentally appropriate program. But a lot of the strategies and tools that are used, obviously, we know that a 2-year-old connects to all of this information very differently to what an 8-year-old does, because of the way they understand themselves in the world, the way they understand their relationships, the way their language develops, the way their communication develops, and the way that their brains and bodies work together. So we know all of that. Most of the strategies, tools, language, all of the learning is very much focused on sustainable and fun learning, which means that all of those things can follow through as much as possible with time. Um, the program itself does evolve, so there's primary years versions and there's early years versions of all of the content for Emmy and how it unfolds. One of the good things about that is that you know, part of that sustainable learning and building on that normalized learning for them, they can take that consistently through to their later years, and as I said before, can build right through to their whole developmental map across their lifespan. There are a couple of elements that will work perfectly for a 7-year-old, but we know that they're not going to work for a 2-year-old. And so we can unpack that together. We know that one of the most common questions that we get in protective behaviours education is around conversations around consent for a toddler. What happens if they refuse to change a nappy? Does that mean that it's the end of the road? We all know that nappy changes keep kids safe, happy and thriving. And so we connect those two different things about making sure that early conversations for consent aren't just about that moment, that particular moment, and saying yes or no. It's about normalizing all of those learning and conversations, making it as fun and sustainable as possible, so children connect to the idea of consent and autonomy about their body in a very different way as they get older. And that can help them with healthy relationships, and all of that learning around keeping their body safe all the way through their life. So yes, it does evolve. Some of the strategies, will work much better for younger or a little bit older. And it is not a stringent, structured program where every sentence needs to connect to all children, because it's not just age, right? Children are completely different. They have different learning experiences, they have different stories in life, they have different developmental experiences, narratives, and ways that they connect to learning, and that's part of the fun. And hopefully we can reflect on all of that together and make the Emmy program right for your child or children, your family, and the centre that your kids go to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. I'm personally so excited to see a program that can be, adapted and so well suited for such little ones, which is, yeah, really wonderful. Well, to everyone, that's about all we have time for tonight. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. The dates for our next family webinar will be shared with all the families shortly, and people will be able to register in the same way that they registered for tonight's webinar. So we really look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. We hope you all have a wonderful evening. Is there anything else from you, Nathan, before we sign off?
Just thank you so much, and it's an honour and privilege to be connected with everyone. The webinars are a great way to do that, and I urge you to throw as many questions as possible, and we'll provide as many answers so we can make sense of this for you, give you as many tools and strategies to fill your toolbox, because obviously our kids are at the centre of everything that we do. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much, Nathan, for being with us tonight, and to all the families that have joined us. Thank you. We've loved having you with us, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everyone.
Good night.